We acknowledge the presence of the author, Senator Risa Ontiveros, our Deputy Minority Leader, our Majority Leader, Senator Joel Villanueva, and Senator Robin Hood Padilla. With the presence of three members of the chamber, the chairperson hereby declares a quorum. Now, may I call on my committee secretary, Attorney Dana Alberto, to acknowledge the presence of our resource persons.
Good afternoon. The Committee on Foreign Relations would like to acknowledge the presence of its distinguished guests, namely from the Department of Foreign Affairs, we have Deputy Assistant Secretary Jesus Enrique G. Garcia II and Attorney Siti Aisa Azizaida L. Tawagon. From the Department of Labor and Employment, we have Undersecretary Benjo Santos M. Benavides. From Commission on Human Rights, we have Attorney Erwin M. Caliba. From the Department of Migrant Workers, we have Assistant Secretary Jerome T. Pampolina, Director Jun Rasul, Chief Mary Sol de la Cruz. From the Department of Justice, we have State Counsel Nancy G. Lozano. From Department of Social Welfare and Development, we have Assistant Secretary Irene B. Dumlao. From the National Economic and Development Authority, we have Assistant Director Edgardo S. Aranjuez II. From the Philippine Commission on Women, we have Attorney Maria Sofia Isabela P. De Castro. From Alliance of Filipino Workers, we have Mr. Rene Capito. From the Alliance of Government Workers in the Water Sector, we have Ms. Abigail Almeria. From Confederation of Independent Unions in the Public Sector, we have Mr. Abdulani Lakibul. From Industrial Global Union, we have Ms. Eva Arcos. From Trade Union Congress of the Philippines, we have Mr. Luis Corral. From Philippine Metal Workers Alliance, we have Ms. Mary Grace Santos. From Philippine Government Employees Association, we have Ms. Esperanza Ocampo. From Philippine Services Labor Independent Confederation, we have Dr. Annie Enriquez Heron. From Kilusan na Manggagawang Kababaihan, we have Ms. Cherizen Zenzen Soriano. From Kilusang Mayo Uno, we have Ms. Lana Linaban Esparago. From Ecumenical Institute for Labor, Education, and Research, we have Ms. Zaira Jean Rodriguez. From Gabriela National Alliance of Filipino Women, we have Ms. Gertrudes R. Libang. From Sentro ng mga Nagkakaisa at Progresibong Manggagawa, we have Ms. Joanna Bernice S. Coronacion. From UNI Global Union Philippine Liaison Council, we have Ms. Angelita Senyorin. That will be all, Your Honors. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Committee Secretary. Last November 6, 2023, the International Labor Organization Convention 190 concerning the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work was referred to this committee, hence the public hearing today. That is our agenda. We call this hearing for the sole purpose of the Senate's concurrence to the ratification of the International Labor Organization Convention 190 concerning the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. This convention recognizes the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment. It is all-encompassing and protects workers regardless of contractual status, sector of employment, or whether domestic or alien. Let us recall that the Philippines was among the first countries which expressed strong support for the convention, ILO 190, and our added bonus for our OFWs, Recommendation 206, is thus in perfect line with the Department of Labor and Employment's 8-point Philippine Labor and Employment Agenda to protect workers and ensure full respect of their rights. May I likewise remind the resource persons of government agencies in particular to first expressly state whether they likewise concur to the ratification or not. Also, I invite now the senators here present, particularly our majority leader and our deputy minority leader, to make comments or other statements before we proceed with the discussion. So would anyone here present like to add?
Ladies first.
Yes, Senator Risa Ontiveros, please.
Agyaman Chair, naimbag nga malem sa ating committee chair, Senator Amy Marcos, to our majority leader, Senator Joel Villanueva, at sa lahat ng mga kasama kong senador na nandito ngayon, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, sa mga union leaders, partikular sa mga representatives ng global unions, sa ating mga opisyal mula sa ehekutibo, at sa lahat pa ng mga bisita at resource persons na nandito ngayon. Bilang chairperson ng Committee on Women, ako po'y masayang-masaya na finally natitipon-tipon tayo ngayon para simulan ang pag-concur sa pagratipika sa isang napakalapit sa aking puso, ang Convention 190 or the Convention on the Elimination of Violence and Harassment in the World of Work. C-190 defines violence and harassment as a range of unacceptable behaviors and practices or threats thereof, whether a single occurrence or repeated, that aim at, result in, or are likely to result in physical, psychological, sexual, or economic harm, and includes gender-based violence and harassment. As the author and sponsor of the Safe Spaces Act, which protects women in all spheres of our lives, including the workplace, I know that violence in the world of work has no place in our society. Karapatan ng bawat babae ang maging ligtas, saan man tayo nandoon, saan man o kasama na ang ating pinagtatrabahuan. Women should not have to live in silence and fear and shouldn't have to be forced to choose between being victims of violence or losing livelihood. Hindi dapat mamili ang mga kababaihan sa karahasan o sa pangangalam ng tiyan. It is our duty to ensure the concurrence and ratification of ILO C-190 as soon as possible. While the protection of women is paramount and is important in and of itself, violence in the world of work also leads to dire social and economic consequences that affect all of us. The concurrence in ILO C-190 will pave the way for key government agencies, employers, and different institutions and stakeholders to work together for an environment and a gender violence and harassment-free space for all workers, whether in the public or private sector or in the formal or informal economy. Alam ng karamihan sa inyo na marami na tayong pinagdaan ng mga pulong, proseso at kampanya para sa ratifikasyon ng ILO C-190 at upang wakasan ang lahat ng uri ng karahasan na nararanasan ng ating mga manggagawa sa iba't ibang paraan at lugar at ng iba't ibang sektor ng ating lipunan, lalong-lalo na ang sektor ng kababaihan. Sa katunayan, last 23rd August, I filed a resolution urging the Executive Department to ratify ILO C-190 and also wrote a letter to our chair, Amy Marcos, requesting her committee to lead the process of concurrence of ILO 190. Agyaman Chair for doing this. I deeply believe that concurring in ILO C-190 will help advance women empowerment, increase labor productivity, and contribute to peaceful industrial relations. It will also support the Philippine government's effort to implement the recommendations of the ILO high-level mission, tripartite mission, to address violations of labor rights and freedom of association. Finally, ILO C-190 ratification will help us meet our target to achieve Sustainable Development Goals 3 and 5, advancing full and productive employment and decent work opportunities, and improved public services and socioeconomic development. I'm very happy and honored that we are all here today. This is an achievement and another milestone to celebrate. We will continue to work to end violence and harassment in the world of work. Mabuhay tayong lahat, mabuhay ang kababaihan, mabuhay ang kilusang paggawa. Congratulations in advance, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. Does the majority leader have anything to add to the statement of our deputy minority?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Bago po mag-duet si Senator Robin tsaka si Senator Risa, unahan ko na po sila. But kidding aside, I know everyone's dying to expedite the process, so I will keep this short, Madam Chair. Let me state for the record my sincerest thanks and gratitude to our chairperson of the Committee on Foreign Relations, Senator Amy Marcos, for including in today's hearing the agenda on the International Labor Organization Convention number 190, or the Convention Concerning the Elimination of Violence and Harassment in the World of Work. Earlier this year, we have been communicating, coordinating with the different labor unions of the country. Dati po tayong chairperson ng Senate Committee on Labor for 6 years at marami tayong napagtagumpayan na programa at maging batas. Yung ending-endo nga, natatandaan ko, naipasa natin on third reading. Kaso nakita ko lang sa ticker ng isang media outlet, binito na. But we are still fighting for it, of course. And I would just like to put on record that earlier this year, together with Senator Risa, this representation also filed Senate Resolution number 456, urging the Executive Department to ratify this ILOC 190. Kaya naman po, Madam Chairperson, maraming salamat at ikinagagalak po natin ang ratifikasyon ng Malacanang sa ILO 190 noong nakaraang buwan at ang pagsumite nito sa Senado upang tayo po ay makapagsang-ayon dito sa pagratifika nito batay sa nakasaad sa ating konstitusyon, sa konstitusyon ng Pilipinas. Ito pong ILO 190 offers a vital channel to address the violence and harassment problems faced by our OFWs. Thousands of our migrant workers encounter maltreatment, mistreatment, contract violation, contract substitution, sexual harassment, and rape, among others. In fact, based on DMW data, at alam na alam po natin to dahil tayo po yung nag-akda at nag-sponsor ng pag-establish ng Department of Migrant Workers. Lagi nating minomonitor ito. Yung latest po, 65,136 labor and welfare cases in Riyadh, 43,225 cases in Kuwait, 29,049 cases in Malaysia from January to July of 2022. So these figures, numbers, they don't lie. Kaya kailangan talaga ng concurrence natin, Madam Chair, dito sa ratification ng ILO 190. It demonstrates our country's unwavering dedication to fostering work environments free from violence and harassment. This is a step towards aligning our policies with global standards, particularly following the 2023 report of the ILO Committee of Experts on the Application of Conventions and Recommendations of the Philippines' Compliance with other ratified ILO conventions. Ipapakiusap ko lang, Madam Chair, kasi time is of the essence here. Kung meron man na mag-o-object dito, yun na lang ang pakinggan siguro natin kasi kung lahat tayo ay sumasang-ayon dito, mamayang gabi ho magkakaroon kami ng pagsasalo-salo ng ating Pangulong Bongbong. Eh hindi ba napakaganda na sabihin sa kanya mamaya tapos na ho sa committee at ira-ratify na namin ito sa sesyon. Kaya po, Madam Chair, again, let me just put on the record, ILO 190 is not just any treaty. It signifies our country's commitment to enact tangible measures for the welfare and protection of our workers. Maraming salamat and may God bless us all.
Maraming salamat at tanggap ko ng buong loob ang suhestyon ng ating minamahal na Majority Leader na kung maaari, palibhasa tayo lahat ay sang-ayon at talagang nagmamadali na maipasa to. Kung maaari, yung tumututol na lamang ang magsalita at bubugbugin namin. Hindi, biro lang, biro lang.
Please don't get me wrong, Madam Chair, please don't get me wrong. They can always submit their position paper.
Yes.
It can always be part of the record of the Senate.
Yun ang
this
sasabihin
committee.
ko next na kahit hindi tayo mabigyan ng pagkakataon na magsalita isa-isa sa iba't ibang partikular na sektor, inaanyayahan ko po kayo na magsumite ng position paper at isasama ko po sa record ng committee hearing natin at pagpapasa at ratifikasyon nitong batas na ito bilang treaty at bahagi ng batas dito sa ating bansa. Okay, so ang una siguro, kailangan tanungin natin muna ang lahat ng grupo rito kung okay sila para sa treaty na ito. Unang-una yung DFA, yes or no lang po. Hindi, mamaya may katanungan naman ako, may ibang mga bagay, legal mechanisms as well as the budget burden that this will impose. I will have to ask that consequently. But in the meantime, to just get the concurrence of the greater number of the national agencies here involved, as well as the stakeholders. Note the DFA, okay po, kayo nagpasok nito eh. DOLE, syempre, DOJ, okay, DMW, DSWD, okay,
Let it be placed on
CHR.
record, Madam Chair, that they are all saying yes.
Yes, they're all saying yes. And NEDA, are you here? Yes. PCW, the Philippine Human Rights Commission. Is there anyone here? Sorry? The Philippine Human Rights Commission? Yes, of course. And the Civil Service Commission, is there any representative? Yes, so Committee Secretary, if you could get the assent, please, of our Civil Service Commission, who apparently have not sent any representative today. If there are any questions from the senators, I would like to entertain them very quickly now. In the meantime, I also have questions that I will hold in abeyance. Okay, that being the case, the ratification of this convention will fortify our state policy in many ways and certainly push forth Goal 5 on gender equality, Goal 8 on decent work in the Sustainable Development Goals. I would just like to inquire from DFA Legal if ILO 190 is self-executory or do we need enabling legislation? Is there anyone from DFA who can reply so that we know what work we have cut out for us? Yes, Asik Garcia, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson and Your Honors. Good afternoon. We're very happy to also be here. We fully support ratification and concur. We believe, ma'am, that it would need some enabling legislation or perhaps amending some of our old laws. But we defer maybe to the more technical expertise of the DOLE, who is maybe the lead in domestic implementation of the convention po.
Yes, that's right. This has to be translated into municipal law. From my understanding, we have several laws already that are related. RA 9262, Anti-Violence Against Women and Children, 7877, also impinges upon this treaty, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, 9710, the Magna Carta of Women, 10361, Domestic Workers Act, the 11166, Prohibition of Discrimination on HIV, and 11210, the Prohibition on Discrimination Against Female Employees on account of their maternity leave, 11313, the Safe Spaces Act, and of course, we revert to Articles 259 and 260 of the Labor Code of the Philippines. So
Madam Chair.
perhaps we should consolidate all these existing laws with whatever future legislation will be necessitated. Yes, Senator Risa, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To add to what the Madam Chair was saying by way of follow-up to the input of the Department of Foreign Affairs, in terms of next steps after the concurrence in the ratification, based on the DOLE, Institute of Labor Studies gap analysis, the Philippines already has various laws and regulations related to addressing violence and harassment. However, there are still gaps which need to be addressed, such as the following: lack of conceptual and operational definition of violence and harassment in the world of work, which possibly contributes to inadequate understanding of its various forms and severity, and therefore the prevention of such acts and behaviors. Limited scope and coverage of existing laws, regulations, and practice to encompass all persons and situations associated with the world of work. Challenging enforcement of legal or regulatory framework, especially for workers in the informal economy and migrant workers, as the Majority Leader mentioned, and narrow approach to violence and harassment instead of treating it as an intersectional inequality issues. Therefore, after ratification, the recommendation is these gaps should be addressed in order to align our national policies and institutional mechanisms with C-190. And lastly, Madam Chair, there's also a a next step suggested, that being the review of existing laws and regulations that explicitly or implicitly exclude non-regular workers for both the private and public sectors, as well as those in the informal economy, to include protection of all workers, regardless of employment status, as the chair mentioned, meaning new hires, job orders, or contract of service, interns, contractual workers, and workers in the informal economy, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. So it is apparent that while we will quickly ratify ILO 190, we need enabling legislation. So I would also like to further inquire, what is the status of Recommendation 206? It was appended and it's of great relevance to us given the big number of Filipinos working overseas. Is it an annex to ILO 190? If we concur with ILO 190, does it automatically also legally bind us to Recommendation 206? May I have a legal opinion, please, from DOJ, DFA, para magawan ng paraan kung kinakailangan? Yes, Asik Garcia, would you have an opinion on this? And also DOJ, perhaps?
Thank you very
This
much.
was an annex that was appended thereafter, but it constitutes part and parcel of ILO 190. Is it automatically binding as well?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. What we understand, ma'am, it's a commentary after the convention. It's not an integral part. It's just a recommendation. It's non-binding.
Are you certain? I don't think it's a commentary. It's
a
an
recommendation
annex.
It's a recommendation by the ILO, which
Okay.
has great authority, but it's not, let's say,
So the ratification of ILO 190 will not include Recommendation 206? Is that what you're saying? What do we need to do in order to include this recommendation of extreme relevance to the Philippines?
perhaps, ma'am, when the Senate concurs, ratifies it can be mentioned in the Senate
Okay.
resolution.
One is an explicit mention, and of course, in the enabling municipal laws that will follow, we will definitely include the Filipinos overseas. Is that correct? Okay, can we start can we start studying that, and perhaps a technical working group simply for legal should be constituted following this meeting to include the MW, the DFA, as well as the DOJ, so that we're clear on these aspects. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to proceed therefore. In that technical working group, we will have to determine also specific modifications to existing laws and regulations, as we have a full gamut of them in the Filipino framework. So what we will need to do will be to study the amendments that will be necessary to these laws. So if you can help me there, technical working group should also address those issues.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
just for clarification and for the education of everyone here, there are no requirement for Congress, any legislative measures that Congress must pass to be fully compliant in ratifying this particular measure, Madam Chair.
Yes, would the DFA like to respond?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. We'd like to give the floor to Yusek Benjo to answer this question.
Yes, Yusek Benavides, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Because the convention covers practically all workers, I think, Madam Chair, we need to legislate or amend existing legislation to cover workers who traditionally are not covered by labor laws.
That's
So
correct.
yun po.
Yes, that's correct, which is why I think that we should constitute immediately after this hearing a technical working group to address those specific gaps that the minority leader already mentioned and which are clearly uncovered in our laws but explicitly mentioned in this ILO resolution. So pag-aralan po natin yan at punuin natin lahat ng pagkukulang ng ating sariling batas. So mauuwi na lamang ako dito sa obligasyon ng Pilipinas. So firstly, we ratify. Secondly, we pass the enabling laws here in our local framework, including the amendments to existing laws. Ikatlo, ano yung mga obligasyon ng gobyerno pag sumang-ayon tayo rito? Because clearly, the convention calls for the conduct of training, hotlines, specialized police units, provision of psychological support, and the DOLE already expressed in their position that additional budget would be required. Is there any way to estimate or somehow guesstimate these amounts?
Madam Chair, I cannot, at this moment, I cannot give the specific amount, especially if we will legislate laws for the workers in the informal economy. Our budget practically covers legislation or implementation of legislation or enforcement of labor laws to formal sector workers.
No, but this is looking forward.
Yes, yes.
Yan ang sa ngayon, ang sinasabi ko,
Going forward, we will need.
Kasi, di ba, ipapasa na nga to, tapos magkakaroon tayo ng mga panibagong batas or amyenda sa mga dating batas. O, yung third part niyan, bibigyan natin ng budget.
Yes.
Pero, paano natin na malalaman kung magkano kaya ito? Napakaraming obligasyon dito,
That is-
Maraming psychological support. Naku, wala naman tayong ganyan. Tapos yung specialized police unit, mahal yan. So, paano natin aalamin yan? Sino ang makakatulong sa atin para mabuo yung mga kinakailangan natin dyan?
In so doing this, Madam Chair, the Department of Labor will lead this in consultation with the employer and workers representative. Karamihan po sa mga gawain natin when it comes to awareness, training, will be practically be done by our social partners, employers, and our workers organization, Madam Chair. Actually, nung ginawa po natin yung trainings as well as advocacy towards the ratification convention, seminars and orientation were conducted not only by the department but also by our stakeholders, the workers and employers organization. So dito po, Madam Chair, hindi lamang po dapat gumalaw dito yung pamahalaan, kasama po natin dito yung mga kamanggagawaan at namumuhunan.
Hindi, pero unahin muna natin ang pamahalaan dahil
Yes, Ms.
kailangan na magbigay tayo at maglaan ng karampatang budget para lahat ng mga obligasyon na ito. Pipirma-pirma tayo rito, hindi naman natin gagampanan.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay,
Madam
so
Chair.
kung pwedeng makatulong ang
Yes, we will.
tropa kung magkano kaya ito. Yes, Senator Ontiveros, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Additional points on possible obligations on our part once we concur in the ratification. And like the earlier points I made of record, Madam Chair, galing po ito sa Philippine affiliates ng Global Union Federations, Public Services International or PSI, Building and Woodworkers International or BWI, Industry All Global Union at saka Uni Global Union. They make further points. For example, we will also need to improve our collection of data in order to effectively respond to violence and harassment in the world of work. Pangalawa, we need active, effective efforts to promote and deepen understanding of violence and harassment among the social partners. Pangatlo, the Philippine government should strengthen mechanisms and programs to support workers in the informal economy and prevent and address violence and harassment. Pang-apat, the Philippine government should strengthen enforcement and monitoring mechanisms to respond to cases of violence and harassment. At panlima, in order to ensure effective coordination, implementation, monitoring, and enforcement, the government should, as the chair was already saying, ensure adequate budget and train personnel in the public sector responsible for addressing violence and harassment in the world of work. For the record, Madam Chair.
Yes, we're aware of the studies initiated by DOLE, the Institute of Labor Studies Gap Analysis. But over and above all the laws and regulations we've already passed to prevent violence and harassment in the world of work, the reality is implementation remains a challenge. So as stated in these studies and by the minority leader, the laws, for the many and well-crafted that they are not properly or effectively implemented or enforced. Are there any other notions or other provisions that we need to establish such that we improve enforcement? And I'd like to inquire from DOLE, DMW, CSU, which is not here, but perhaps the CHR, other concerned agencies, your proposed plans of action for addressing the gaps and challenges already pointed out by many studies in the implementation of our labor laws and conventions. So perhaps DOLE, DMW, CSW, CSC, at yung iba pang ahensya. Dahil may mga plano ba kayo na paigtingin ang implementasyon nitong mga batas na to? Kadami-dami nating batas, pero hindi naman na enforce ika nga.
Yeah.
Hindi naman napapagtibay. At maraming violations, di ba? Lalo na sa DMW. Meron ba kayong maisip? May plano ba kayo kung paano maisasatupad itong mga batas na ito? Yes, Yusek Benavides, perhaps DMW also. Of course, the figures cited by the majority leader are dismal. Riyadh, 65,000, Kuwait, 42, and it goes on and on. Napakarami nito. So, paano nating paigtingin ang pag-i-implementa nitong mga batas na ito? Kasi baka i-ratify natin, karagdagan na naman itong pampabigat. Hindi naman umaahon sa hirap ang ating mga manggagawa. Yusek Benavides.
Madam Chair, our labor inspection program, I think, is a tool that to enforce existing laws as well as new laws to implement this convention. We just need to adequately provide specific legal cover to the Labor Inspectorate program. Because again, as I pointed out a while ago, the limitation of the
Kano budget niyan sa 2024?
600 million, Mr. Chair.
Kasama dyan yung lawyer's fees? At
No,
karagdagan mga abogado?
wala na pong abogado, Madam Chair. These are inspectors.
Okay. So inspector lang yan, pero yung
Apo.
legal cover na sinasabi mo, wala pa riyan.
The legal cover is to provide us.
No, I understand what
Apo.
legal cover means, but I'm just asking, within that 600 million, is are lawyers' fees included or additional
No,
hire of lawyers?
Hindi po kasama yung mga lawyers, but we have lawyers in the regional offices. At least one lawyer we have at least one lawyer in our regional offices.
Yes,
Most
but
of
we
them
all
is-
know the state of the DOLE lawyers. They're underpaid and overworked. So, dadagdagan mo lang ng trabaho yan, kawawa naman.
Yes, Madam Chair. But I think tingnan po natin dun sa kabilang side ng enforcement. One thing mentioned is on deepening the understanding of the sector of kung ano yung Convention 89 and how to better implement this. We can do this by touching base the sectors themselves, the workers, the employer, so that hindi po makakargahan ng mas maraming trabaho yung inspectorate program. If workers and employers are cognizant what Convention 190 is, mas madali po yung enforcement and implementation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, are there any other ideas from the DOJ, DMW, DSWD? Paano ma-i-implement to? Kasi baka wala, parang papogi lang tayo nito. State Council Lozano, please. Hindi, kasi gagawa na rin tayo ng panibagong batas. Tapangan na natin.
Thank you po. On the part of the DOJ po, right now po, maybe we can recommend when we develop the legislation implementing the convention, some protection on the labor inspector, like not really an absolute immunity from suit, but some protection against harassment suit filed against them while doing their job. So maybe po, it can be included in the law itself.
Tama, kahit walang abogado, at least nakasaad na doon. Kaya maliwanag na.
Opo.
So dapat mag-usap talaga kayo ng DOLE at yung DOJ kung paano ipagtatanggol naman itong mga inspector at baka sila naman ang kasuhan. Ano? So narito rin ang DSWD, baka meron tayong magawa rin sa pangkat ninyo. Meron pa ba tayong magawa? Dahil lahat ng informal sector bumabagsak sa inyo, wala sa listahan ng DOLE.
Good afternoon po, Madam Chair, and to the honorable members of the committee. On the part of the DSWD, of course, we are committed to deliver the needed assistance, the needed and appropriate assistance para po sa mga victims ng violence. We employ case management together
Is
with...
there any effort to actually inventory the informal sector? Are we actually trying to trace this number? Or is it this great 42% that remains nebulous, vague, and without faces? Meron bang effort dyan ng DOLE o di kaya yung ASEC ng DSWD? Kasi parati natin pinag-uusapan yung informal sector. Parati lang sinasabi 42%. Halos kalahati. Pero may effort ba tayo na hanapin sila?
Madam Chair, there was an effort on the part of NAPSI, informal sector, and we were part of that. Medyo hindi lang po, I just don't know if we have representative here from NAPSI WIS.
I'm
But
sorry,
it
they
will
were not invited yata eh.
Yeah. It
Pero
will
I just wanted to know kung
Yeah,
have
there
we
was an-
inroads in this great mass
Opo,
of informal
meron po
workers?
kasi yung ang planong gawin po ay talagang ilista, hanapin kung nasaan yung mga informal sector workers. But it will require huge resources. Kasi
Well,
hindi,
we've already expended great resources during Bayanihan 1 and 2 with SAP 1 and 2 with the huge listings that were so controverted. Pero ginampanan pa rin ng DSWD. Anong mga listahan ang ginamit ninyo? ASEC Dumlao po.
Well, Madam Chair, for the implementation of the Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2, we made use of the listahanan 2. Presently, ginagamit po natin yung listahanan
Listahan ng
3.
3 na. Pero tapos na yan. Wala nang listahanan. Pagkatapos ng listahan ng 3, tapos na yan. The end na, no?
Yes, and we're supposed to work with the PSA for the, for the CBMS.
That's correct. But once again, the huge mass of informal workers will fall through the cracks. Ano kaya ang plano natin? Siguro, isa pa yan dahil pangkalahatang sakop itong ILO 190. Informal na dati, hindi naman binabanggit yan eh. Andito at hindi naman mapagkakaila sa Pilipinas. Halos kalahati talaga yan. So dapat malista rin siguro yan. Maybe some suggestions should be made and our majority leader looks anxious to add.
If Yusek Benjo would like to comment right away, but I will point out
Madam
something.
Chair, just to add, I understand na meron pong Magna Carta for the informal sector worker. Yung
Which I'm espousing that, Madam Chair, but other than the informal settlers, we should also think about the freelancers, Madam Chair, because even right now, I think all of us would agree that the labor code does not, in a way, cover
Correct.
freelancers.
That's correct.
and,
I think
it's a concern.
the ILO 190 is very up to date in that it refers no longer to a territory or workplace, but more importantly, the entire world of work. So bago to sa atin, wala tayong batas na nagsasaad na may world of work pala. Kailangan talaga na i-update rin natin kasi yung mga gig workers, online, digital, hindi naman kasama yan dati. Hindi rin kasama lahat ng informal na meron tayong batas sa kasambahay, meron sa informal settlers, pero pira-piraso, medyo watak-watak yan. Iba-iba yung naka sa loob dyan. Kaya eto nga, itong informal workers, perhaps we can make another technical working group. Ikalawa to, yung isa, yung legal obligations imposed by ILO 190 and recommendation 206 ratification. Ikalawa, sana yung DSWD, yung DOLE at iba pa sumapi para mag-isip tayo kung paano bibilangin at hahanapin ang ating informal sector na laging hindi kasama sa iba't ibang batas. Isama na po natin, total nandyan na sa ILO 190. Gamitin natin ang pagkakataon na malista at makilala silang lahat.
Madam Chair,
Madam
if I may just finish.
Yes,
with
sorry.
documents of my-
Yes,
my colleagues,
Majority Leader.
So again, yung sa freelance workers, let me state for the record, this representation filed yung Senate Bill number 136 providing for protection of freelance workers. I would like to pound on what our chairperson is doing here right now, because at the end of the day, she will be asked and be interpellated as she sponsors this particular measure that we are all supporting, that, and we are all agreeing that we need to ratify this ILO 190. Madam Chair, let me also state for the record, if we can actually ask government agencies, including labor groups, to give us some data. For example, their gap analysis on our existing laws, Madam Chair. Kanina we talk about the concerning figures on violence and harassment in the workplace vis-a-vis the principles set out in this ILO 190 convention. Gusto ho natin na makita iyon, no? And nasaan ba yung state of compliance natin sa mga batas na ito? Kasi, Madam Chair, after we pass this, yun ang sasabihin, no? I'll give you an example. For example, ito pong Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act, 1995 pa po ito. Ito po yung Shared Government Information System. Shared Information Government System since 1995. 2023 na po ngayon. Every time we ask for data, you have different figures. We were together, Madam Chair, in Paris. We have a different figure from the embassy, from DMW, and from DFA. So, dun pa lang makikita na natin, no? So, sana while we are doing this, nagre-ready na rin tayo. Kasi, examples, pinabanggit natin kanina, yung violence and harassment, merong RA 6725, prohibition on discrimination against women with respect to terms and conditions of their employment, prohibition on discrimination against disabled employees, 7277, RA 7277, RA 10911, yung discrimination against individual in employment on account of age. How are we complying with that? Laws against hostilities in the workplace that are sexual in nature. Nandiyan yung 7877. Nandiyan yung 11313, favorite ni Senator Risa and Senator Amy, yung Safe Spaces Act, etc. So, mahalaga po, Madam Chair, na makita sana natin yung ating compliance, yung state of our compliance on these laws, para soon as we ratify, we can already come up with a list of priority measures that we need to pass. Yun lang po, Madam Chair, at maraming salamat.
Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. Our Deputy Minority Leader, please.
Salamat, Madam Chair. At salamat sa Chair at sa Majority Leader sa pagbanggit sa mga freelancers. Itong representasyong ito may Senate bill din po, katulad ng kay Majority Leader, para sa karapatan at kagalingan ng mga workers in the informal economy. Kasama na po yung ating mga delivery riders na nagsusulong talaga na magkaroon sila ng isang governing law, regulating law para sa kanilang mga rights and welfare. At salamat na ginawa silang visible kahit dito sa pagkonsidera natin sa pag-concur sa ratifikasyon ng Convention 190 ng ILO. Salamat, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. And by way of information na lang po, last hirit ko na lang to, maybe by way of information for the committee and for my colleagues, including Senator Robin and the rest, how many of the countries where there's a substantial number of OFWs have signed or ratified ILO 190 or intend to do so? Yung mga binabanggit lagi, yung parating starring sa ating dyaryo, yung pong Kuwait, Yung pong Saudi, may balak bang pumirma yan ng ILO 190? May idea po ba yung DFA? Para malaman natin. 36 pa lamang ang pumipirma. Tama yun. Tama, sabi nga ni Senator Robin. Kung 36 pa lamang ang pumipirma, pwede bang, may sistema bang magbibigay tayo ng diin at prioridad na yung ating mga OFW ay mapunta muna doon kung saan kinikilala itong mga batas na to? At wag muna sa ibang nakaka-nervyos na lugar na lagi na lang sila napipinsala.
Sige po, sir.
Any reaction from ASEC DMW? I am not certain that this is feasible, but it may be far-fetched, but is there something we can actually do?
Yes, ma'am. Just to list the countries which has ratified the ILO Convention 190. Mostly it is EU countries, so Albania, Antigua, South Africa.
We are also in receipt of the list.
Yeah,
Ang
so-
tinatanong ko, itong parating nadyadyaryo sa atin,
Wait.
wala pong pumipirma dyan, yung mga Kuwait,
Yeah.
Saudi.
Yes, probably, Your Honor, what the DMW
Baka
can.
palamuti lang to kasi hindi naman sila kasali. Papogi na lang tayo. Paano?
What we can do, Madam Chair, is that the DMW can have bilateral labor agreements with those countries.
Yes,
And-
I think there was an effort,
Yes.
diba, with Kuwait specifically to
Yes.
audit the performance of the migrant workers officers following the death of Julie B. Ranaran.
Yes, ma'am.
Will the DMW follow up with that, or is there any other innovative, more creative solution to this really heinous crimes being repeated time and again with impunity?
Yes, ma'am. I think the efforts of the DMW is more for negotiating the terms of the employment of our OFWs in those countries, particularly.
Understood, but shouldn't it encompass also some encouragement to join the ILO 190 countries muna? Doon muna sila magtrabaho.
Perhaps, ma'am, baka we cannot force them to join, but
No, I
what we-
understand. No, we cannot force anyone to do anything. But ang akin lamang, siguro mas madali kapag panatag ang kalooban natin na hindi sila madadali dyan sa lugar na yan.
Ma'am,
Yes, Asek Garcia, you seem to...
no,
sorry.
ma'am, let me just add, baka we can do a bilateral agreement whereby yung terms nung C-190
Parang
can.
tagal ko na naririnig tungkol sa Kuwait at Saudi. Bakit wala pa nangyayari?
Matagal kasi po yung negotiations.
Tagal na niyan, di ba?
Yes po.
Haba-haba na ng usapin.
Yes po.
Matagal po ako nasa Middle East at natira sa mga Arabo. Madali silang kausapin, wag lang publiko. Wag lang binubulabog at hinihiya. Naku, lalaban at lalaban. Kaya't mas mainam kaibiganin muna at matatapos yan ng mabilisan.
Yes po. We agree, ma'am.
Kaya nga, maari siguro, pag-isipan natin kung paano. Asek Garcia, please.
Yes, ma'am. Just to add a little bit, ma'am, based on ASEC DMW's comments, of course, in our bilateral discussions and engagements, we can encourage quietly, how they might sign on to at least the principles of ILO 190. There are also regional discussions where this
Yes,
should be
without...
highlighted as a general statement.
That's right.
We can encourage, destination countries as a whole, also regionally in the Gulf, to please look at this convention seriously. We can advocate for this in the
think-
international arena,
That's correct.
and also, ma'am, in the UN. We can continue to raise our voice on the importance of protecting migrant workers, as Sir mentioned. And you mentioned, it's a global world of work, hindi na national. So we all have responsibilities. And I'm in particularly thinking about, ma'am, the Human Rights Council, where there's a universal periodic review. All countries' human rights, obligations are discussed. So in a very friendly way, we could mention when some destination countries are being reviewed, we can mention that they can consider, because they do the same to us. When they say ratify this, ratify that. So please study this because of your the importance of our labor for your economy and your people too. So actually, let's be fair
Hindi
to each
naman
other.
hindi naman bawal o masama na banggitin yung
Banggitin
ILO
lang in
190
a very
diyan sa bilateral.
parang ganun.
'Di ba?
In-
Parang in passing, en
Madam
passant.
Chair.
Okay, Majority
Thank you.
Leader.
Madam Chair, just very quick intervention, and I just wanted to make sure that in ratifying this ILO 190, ang impact nito hindi magkakaroon ng negative impact sa atin, considering na binabanggit nga po natin yung top 5 areas in the regions, no? You have in the Middle East, for example, yung Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Israel, United Arab Emirates. Tapos doon naman po sa Asia Pacific, nandyan yung Malaysia, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, South Korea. They are all not signatories. No? So, ang gusto lang natin masiguro, one, walang negative impact sa atin. Two, yung ratification impact yung impact nitong ratification sa ating mga kababayan ay positibo, at ito ay it will somehow, as I believe it will reduce the number of labor and welfare cases against OFWs, particularly in countries with high labor and welfare cases. Kanina binanggit ho natin sila yun But unfortunately, they are not signatories, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Deputy Minority, that's correct. I was going to comment that. In fact, that's really the problem. Pipirma-pirma tayo rito. Yung mga lumalabag latis sa ating batas at nagkakaproblema yung ating mga kababayan, hindi naman pumirma. Paano to? Non-binding sa kanilang lahat to. So, Deputy Minority, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking of regions, Southeast Asia or the whole of Asia, yung isa pong interesante rin dito, when we concur, if and when we fully ratify, we will actually be the first country in Asia to do so. So magandang simbolo, and it really opens up another area for leadership of the country among fellow Asian countries. And yung pong pinag-uusapan nating bilateral treaties, mayaman talaga yung potential niyan. We hear that also from our overseas or migrant workers advocates groups, yung magandang i-maximize, i-optimize yung bilateral treaties. For example, yung ina-advocate nilang portability of pension. In the same way, pwede natin i-maximize para dito sa mutual observance of C-190. Salamat, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. That the portability of pensions has become a big issue, including insurance. Hanggang ngayon, di mapasa-pasa yung sa South Korea dahil mahabang diskusyon.
Madam Chair, naisip
Yes
ko lang,
po.
kasi binabanggit natin dito sa pagpupulong itong mga impacts and benefits ng ating mga kababayan, lalo na ng ating mga migrant workers, no? May yung International Labor Organization, let me just throw this issue on the table. Yung ILO assists its members in implementing the provisions of ILO C-190, hindi ho ba? So, ano ho ba yung mga pupwede nilang maitulong aside from yung social dialogue, yung technical assistance? Are there any other forms of assistance that the International Labor Organization could provide to its member states once we ratify this? This would also help us convince our colleagues, Madam Chair, in expediting the ratification of this ILO C-190. Yes, Yusek Benjo.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair rather, gusto ko pong magkwento based on personal experience, because as we observe, trade negotiations are now linked with compliance with international standards. Dati po yung USTR are strong on child labor, on women. Pumasok po tayo sa EU GSP. EU GSP requires compliance with international standards on governance, human rights, labor. So yung IPEF po ngayon is also strong on compliance with international standards. So maybe this time yung ILO po will make this as one of the items para po pag nagkakaroon ng multilateral trade agreements, isa po ito sa mga conditions so that countries or parties to the trade negotiation will comply with the
Yes.
standards.
That's correct. Dahil siguro meron ba tayong cost-benefit analysis dito sa pagraratipikan nito? syempre, papasok yan sa reputational enhancement ng Pilipinas as an investor, as an investment grade country. For example, we're looking forward to the lapse of the GSP Plus for the European Union in December 20. Malaking bagay sa kanila yung labor situation ng bansa. So, palagay ko, dapat mag-cost benefit na rin tayo to assess the financial implications of the convention to improve local business and also attract investment. Because I think particularly in the case of the European Union, this is a very large factor, even as ESG and the others do play a factor as well. Baka pwede kayong magsanib puwersa ng DTI. Kasi sila ang salesman ng Pilipinas. Malaking bagay talaga kapag maipagmalaki natin na nangunguna tayo sa lahat ng labor laws, labor enforcement at pagraratipika ng mga ILO conventions. Okay. Are there any other matters or persons that need to be heard? Yes, I think Ms. Coronacion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to the members of the committee. We sincerely support the concurrence of the Senate for the ratification of ILO Convention 190. And I really appreciate, Madam Chair, when you said that we really need a strategy because Article 4, number 2, letter C of the ILO Convention said that adopting a comprehensive strategy in order to implement measures to prevent and combat violence and harassment is one of the tasks of the member state, and which means that if you want to create a comprehensive strategy, it's very important not just to the players of the government agencies, but the workers and employers themselves are involved in crafting the strategy. And you said ano po yung mga proposals no na kailangan pang gawin. We support yung sa bilateral labor agreements para sa ating mga migrant workers. That Convention 190 is part of the leverage kasi yung kagandahan din po sa Convention 190 is an opportunity for us to develop discussions and dialogue. Ano ba yung violence, ano yung mga karanasan, ano yung mga datos, and it's an opportunity for us to have an inventory ng mga existing BLAs, ano yung mga kulang sa BLAs, at ano yung mga bansa na wala pang bilateral labor agreements. But at the same time, naalala naman po natin, no, si LV, isang kasambahay, and the labor inspection provision doesn't cover kasambahay dahil nasa private household sila. And the said Article 10 letter H when it comes to inspection, all workers should be covered by inspection. Sa ngayon, halimbawa, 84% ay hindi cover ng SSS, PhilHealth, sa mga kasambahay na 1.9 million. And if you talk about violence and harassment, it has impact to economic harm. So aside dun sa vulnerability ng mga kasambahay sa sexual violence, nandun din yung economic harm nila. So it will really pave way, and that's a very good opportunity for us to improve our labor inspection that will cover domestic workers. And finally, to cover also contractual workers, not just in the private sector, but public sector as well, because Civil Service Commission, unfortunately, they are not here. Yung mga batas na generate nila or policy doesn't cover job orders or contract of workers. So when they experience violence and harassment in many different forms, napakahirap no ng grievance procedure or ng redress mechanism para sa kanila. Maraming salamat po, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. I think, yes, Dr. Ann Heron. Yes, and I'm not certain who the other person.
Magandang hapon po, Madam Chair.
And
Thank
Ms.
you very
Arcos,
much.
sige.
Thank you very much for calling this hearing at ang naririnig ko po dito ay pinag-uusapan na po ng committee ang direksyon post-ratification. At napakaganda po niyang
Mayabang
indikasyon.
po yung chairman.
Pinag-uusapan na po natin ano yung gagawin natin pag na-ratify. No, maganda pong indikasyon to kasi lahat po tayo ay kumbinsido na dito. So ang akin na lang po dito na dun sa discussion, yung tungkol po sa DMW, nasa kamay po natin na mag-enter ng bilateral labor agreement sa mga bansa. Unahin po natin yung bansa na rumirespeto sa karapatan ng ating mga manggagawa. Yung DMW law, yung DMW law, nakalagay doon na dapat magde-deploy tayo sa bansa na mayroon ng mga labor laws na nagpuprotekta sa karapatan ng mga manggagawa. So nasa kamay po natin yan. At Madam Chair, may instrument po, may WHO code ng fair and ethical recruitment,
Pero
may
di ba
Global
dapat
Compact on
unahin yung
Migration.
salbahe?
Po?
Unahin yung salbahe. Sila nananakit ng Pilipino eh.
Kaya nga po, gamitin po natin pang leverage yung mga framework na yon, katulad ng
Tama.
rights-based
That's right.
and fair and ethical recruitment. Mayroon na po sa pangmundong pamantayan yan. So parang pag nag-mapping tayo ngayon sa negosasyon natin, kasi ito hawak natin yung desisyon eh, hindi hawak nung kabila. Tayo, hawak natin na doon tayo mag-deploy sa kung kinikilala bilang tao at manggagawa yung
Okay.
ating mga OFW. Huwag nating puntahan yung problematic, no? At lagi na lang tayong nagre-respond. So, yung mga
Tama.
sinasabi
Sa
niyo po,
kabila ng ayaw natin maging racist,
Opo.
andyan naman ang record, ano?
opo.
Napakaliwanag.
Bakit gusto nating magpadala ng ng ating mga OFW sa bansa na nandun yung patayan, yung violence, no? Di unahin na po natin, kailangan nila yung manggagawang Pilipino, gawin nating pang-leverage yun. Tapos yung isang puntos ko po, Madam Chair, yung pong mga sinabi niyo ng hakbangin, no? Data, kulang ng datos, yung mga dapat gawin ng mga ahensya. Kami po sa kilusang paggawa, yung labor sector, prepared po kami na makipagtulungan sa gobyerno, no, na pagtulungan po natin 'yan. At doon sa panukala po ng TWG, wag niyo pong kalimutan na isama ang representative o kinatawan ng labor para
Okay.
po magkakatono na po tayo sa usapan
Tama.
dito. So, maraming salamat po.
Thank
Hindi ko na ulitin kasi nasabi na po ni Majority Leader Joel Villanueva, si Senator Risa, lahat po nung mga justification bakit
Okay.
tayo So finally po, tayo yung unang country sa Asia na magra-ratify. Pero hindi lang po yung titulong tayong nauna, pero gawin nating tayo yung pinakamagaling na mag-implement ng C190. Maraming salamat po.
Inshallah. Talaga naman. Okay, Eva Arcos, please.
Marami pong salamat, Madam Chair. And
Pipigilan ko kayo at a certain time kasi
Opo.
magse-session po kami. Pero sa kabila nito, talagang kinaanyayahan ko kayong lahat na magsumite ng position paper o anumang karagdagang impormasyon na makakatulong sa diskusyon. Yes po.
idagdag ko lang po yung sinabing sa 36 countries na nag-ratify ng ILO Convention 90. 12 po from Europe, 10 from Africa, 7 from South America, 5 from North America, and 2 from the Pacific. So wala pa po sa Asia at lalong-lalo na dun sa mga problematic. Well, opo, pa sila, 10 po. So yan po yon. Tapos yung nabanggit kanina, ILO commitment, meron po silang sinabi sa research kasi kadalasan kulang tayo ng pondo para sa mas malawak na pagre-research, lalo na kung global, yan ang kinomit nila. Yung pong nabanggit na bilateral negotiations, pwede pong idagdag. Kasi po may PIDOS tayo, pre-departure orientation programs. Dapat po i-require ang topic na ito bago umalis ang ating mga kababayan, ang C-190. May PIDOS po. And then, yung pong mga attaches sana at embassies, sana equipped sila sa pag-respond dito sa ating mga kababayan na biktima at survivors ng gender-based violence, no. At yung pang-apat po ay sana madagdagan ng pondo. Meron tayong yung migrant law, meron doong pondo na sinasabing tutulong doon sa mga kababayan nating nagkakaroon ng kaso sa ibang bansa. So yan po, yung gusto ko rin pong dagdagan, nabanggit po kasi yung commitments natin sa Sustainable Development Goals. Aside po doon sa nabanggit na SDG 3 at SDG 5, ay pwede rin pong idagdag ang SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. And then SDG 10 on reduced inequalities. And then SDG 16 on peace, justice, and institutions. The other po is makabanggit na rin po sa dami po ng ating batas, women-specific and related laws, ay ang kakulangan talaga ay sa implementation. Ang pinakamaganda po talaga, na-cover halos lahat actually nung in-sponsor ni Senator Risa, yung 11313. Napaka-encompassing yan. Ang problema natin is lalo na yung implementation. Kung pwede ko pong mabanggit, marami pong pribadong sektor or institutions na kumukop-kop sa mga babae at mga batang nabibiktima ng karahasan kasi po kulang tayo sa gobyerno. So sana po magkaroon ng pondo para sa crisis centers kasi may mga nangangailangan ng refuge. Yan pagka sila po ay naabuso, no? So yung fund support po doon sana. Opo. Opo. So kulang po, tiningnan na po natin lahat ng mga institutions o yung mga structures under ng DSWD. At ang katotohanan po, like ako po connected sa siguro 3 institutions na tumutulong sa mga biktima, kulang po kasi. Yan po yung ano.
Okay.
Hanggang
Sorry.
dyan na lang po. Salamat.
Okay, maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat at I'll really have to cut this down. Sorry, meron pa bang idadagdag na suggestion? Suggestion lang po kasi hindi naman ito kahuli-huli ang hearing tungkol dito dahil sunod-sunod tuloy-tuloy ang trabaho. Meron ba kayong idadagdag na suggestion?
Good afternoon po, Madam Chair and honorable members ng ating Senado. Dadagdag ko lang po kasi nag-share kami ng sentiments sa ating mga senador na talagang may problema tayo sa datos, no? Yung accuracy ng data natin. So ito na naman po, total post ratification na yung pinag-uusapan natin. Sana naman po maisama natin yung datos kung ilan ba talaga ang biktima nitong karahasang mga kababaihan sa mundo ng paggawa. Kasi I'm sure hanggang ngayon wala tayong hawak. No, ipapasa natin tong batas na to na bulag tayo. Ilan nga ba ang biktima o naging biktima ng mga karahasan sa mundo ng paggawa. So dapat maisama natin ito at willing pong makipagtulungan yung mga stakeholders. Kami po ang nakakaalam, kami po ang nakikipag-usap sa mga biktima. So isama niyo po kami sa pagbubuo ng datos nito. Marami pong salamat.
Oo, kakailanganin yung tulong ninyo. Pero may nagtaas ng kamay dito sa kanan. Opo. I think I can't entertain any more than 2 more persons given the time. Yes, Miss Ocampo.
Maraming salamat po, Madam Chair and Honorable Senators. Alam niyo po, ang gusto ko lang po i-suggest dito dahil nasabi naman lahat na, yun lang pong issue ng paano makakakuha ng tamang datos upang masabi na kino-cover natin ang entire workers in the world of work. So, ito po ay simple lang. Ang barangay ay mayroong kakayahan at tunay na datos na ang DSWD ay ginagamit din. So, ang sinasabi lang po ng manggagawa ngayon, ang manggagawa together with the barangay, together with the DSWD, ay pwedeng magtulong-tulong. Kung may magagawa po, Madam Chair, na paraan o mandato na kung saan ay pakikilusin agad ito. Ako po yung naniniwala at ang aking kasamahan sa Philippine Government Employees Association, together, of course, with the Trade Union Congress of the Philippines, at yung pong aming kasama sa Public Services International, ay, ma'am, sa inyong mga kamay, kami ay umaasa. Pasensya na po kung sabihin ko ito, ngunit ito isang paraan din ng pagsasabi o paglalahad ng aming paniniwala sa iyong pamamahala o sa iyong chairmanship na ito ay magkakaroon ng ratification kundi man sa araw na ito, kundi sa buwan na ito. Maraming salamat po.
Depende po sa plenaryo. Maraming salamat po. May sapay, iisa na lamang. Attorney Caliba. I can't read your card very well. Where do you come from?
CHR po.
Okay.
Looking forward po, ma'am, on enforcement and remedies, on safe and effective remedies po. Ang pwede pong maiambag ng Commission on Human Rights, since violence and harassment is a human rights issue as well. Meron siyang investigative function, meron din siyang witness protection program, may financial assistance na kung kinakailangan. So we wanted also to contribute kasi hahaba po dahil yung mga workers and other persons in the work of world ay talagang malawak. Maybe that's also what we can contribute. Chair.
Yes, thank you very much for your input. And with that, allow me to consolidate the findings. Assuming the ratification, kasi nga sang-ayon naman lahat dito at walang tumututol, unang-una magkukumpuni tayo ng isang grupo para pag-aralan ang mga legal measures na kinakailangan pa, mga enabling laws in the municipal sphere. At marami tang suhestyon tungkol sa iba't ibang magagawa para sa ating improved enforcement ika nga dahil nga napakaraming batas hindi naman na isasatupad. So unang-una nabanggit na yung labor inspection teams, yung programa ng DOLE na kinakailangan ng konting suporta. Nagsuggest rin ang DOJ na maari siguro lagyan ng ngipin at ipagtanggol, depensahan yung mga nag-inspeksyon kahit wala pang abogado. At ikalawa, nabanggit din ng DFA, ng DMW na talagang tatrabahuin at pag-iingtigin ang effort na magkaroon ng mga bilaterals sa ating iba't ibang host countries kung saan napakarami ng Pilipino, kung saan babanggitin natin yung ILO 190. Ikatlo, ang problema ng datos na talagang umiiral sa bawat issue dito sa ating bansa. Mula na sa mga women victims, child victims at mga naabuso sa iba't ibang dako ng daigdig. At sa SAPE, nag-volunteer na ang ating mga NGOs, stakeholders at ang national government na sana magkaroon ng karagdagang pondo at tauhan para mabuo ito. Kasapi na yung DILG at yung barangay kung saan ang pagkaalam ko madalas nagkakaroon ng isang kagawad na nakatutok para sa kababaihan at kabataan. Ikaapat, yung inventaryo at paglilista at pagkakakilala ng ating informal sector na hanggang ngayon wala pa tayong maayos na listahan. Ikalima, yung cost benefit analysis para ipakita na ang pag-ratifikan nitong ILO 190 kasama ng annex niya na recommendation 206 ay talagang magbibigay ng ang tawag nito, reputational enhancement sa Pilipinas bilang investment grade country. At mapapatunayan natin yan ng DFA, ng DTI, kaakibat ang DOLE. Ngayon, yung enforcement provisions, dahil nga parati tayo nagkukulang sa implementasyon at enforcement, dagdagan po natin ang parusa, pag-aralan kung kinakailangan ng penal, administrative, and other sanctions. Pag-aralan rin ano ang magandang grievance and redress mechanisms that will be effective and efficient both in the workplace and without. The provision also of refuge and other places of shelter and safe shelter dito sa lokal kung hindi lamang sa international. At ikapito, yung sinabi po ng ating grupo na gamitin ang international standards na itinakda na ng WHO, ng UN at iba't iba pang mga international organization. Ito ang kinikilala ng buong mundo at kilalanin rin natin dito sa Pilipinas, gamitin sa enforcement ng ating mga iba't ibang batas na hanggang ngayon kahit maganda ang intensyon ay wala pa ring ngipin. So yun ang aking ire-report out sa komite at sana tulungan po ninyo, ibuo na natin yung ating mga technical working group at asahan na sa lalong madaling panahon, hindi lamang maratifika ito, kundi ma-implementa sa buong world of work ng Pilipinas at ng Pilipino. Maraming salamat po. And with that, I suspend the hearing, referring therefore the unanimous concurrence of all government agencies here present, all NGOs, and most importantly, my colleagues from the Senate. Maraming salamat po.